Our alarm is ringing. We set the alarm 7 days ago at the end of our weekly video on the situation of specs and classes in the raid. So 7 days later, we are gonna do it again. There are quite a few interesting things happening this week. One of these is tied to the balance tuning, of course, one of these specs, which is now very quickly rising to be one of the top specs in the raid. And another one is quite funny, albeit a bit sad as well, is the fact that if you are very lazy and you look at the surface level results, you go to Warcraft logs, you click on the raid statistics, you will see this. So all of a sudden, apparently, Unholy Death Knight players have lost completely their ability to play the game. If you check last week, this is what we had. So it looked like things were going okay for Unholy, but 1 week to the next, Unholy is now doing tank damage. Now you're wondering, I haven't kept track of the balance tuning, not for my spec, so I'm not sure what happened there. No, Unholy hasn't been nerfed, nothing happened to the spec in this reset. What happened to the spec was the little prank of a comedian. So this is Dimensius, this is Mythic Dimensius. Obviously, many of these results are still quite random because there aren't many public logs, so a few of these are not very reliable. But maybe you haven't even noticed it because you were busy checking the results. There is also one dot right here. This is the rare case of a common occurrence. The common occurrence is boosting, you know. Guilds have killed about, what, 80 or so guilds have killed Dimensius, so a few of those have gotten into boosting the raid, and then some players get to pay to kill the last boss, for example. That's pretty common. What is not common is that everyone, up to this point, was playing Frost. Frost, in fact, was the second most played spec in the boss. So the rare occurrence is that the player who bought the boost happened to be the only player who was Unholy for the fight. This little trooper right here, Thoralgor. Thoralgor decided to join a certain Russian guild. Since they are open logging, they have no problem being named, although I can't name this, so we have to ask the help of our translator over here. Wrath of Anarchy fellas, they boosted this guy, and he doesn't even appear, of course, in the damage meter because he died immediately. That's kind of the problem of checking these results, because even though Warcraft logs takes the precaution of only counting bosses with at least 50 public kills for that boss, it doesn't do so for specs. So even if you have a single player logging on the boss, like Unholy, which in this case is a boost, unfortunately, it will go and be weighted in the average of your results in the overall damage. Obviously, in these results so far, you can see from the dots, you also have an affliction, you have an enhancement, you also have a frost mage right here at the bottom of the play rate, but these specs were actually normal players playing. So yes, their results are still very unreliable. It's not that Frost Mage is actually the third best spec on the fight, it was just one player being there, but unfortunately in the case of Unholy it was a boost, and because it's gonna count in the average, now when you have to make the average of the performance of Unholy, it will weigh the average DPS. So if you start weighing, you know, the average DPS of Unholy, which is like, you know, pretty high right now. It's like median 4 million DPS on Plexus Sentinel. Then you move over to Lumitar, still very high, median 5 million DPS, and then on Araz it's 6 million DPS, and then the median that will go in the average is 0. That is why at the moment Unholy has crashed completely at the bottom of the meters in this raid. So we need some good Samaritan Frost DKs in their re-clears to go in Dimensius and play Unholy, just so they can actually drag this average up. Because, you know, there have been boosts already. This is not a new thing. For example, Dimensius was being boosted, but so was, for example, the Soul Hunters. You have multiple players being boosted on Soul Hunters, but the difference is you have dozens, if not hundreds, of actual players performing on Soul Hunter. So obviously, if you have a couple of players being boosted like this, is not it's not going to affect too much the results, right? So the problem is only having one player in this final result. So just have more Frost DKs playing Dimensius. So they are going to be dragging up this awful average on Dimensius for Unholy DK. So they go back to being actually pretty decent this tier. As for the other specs, obviously the focus of the week is on Beast Mastery Hunter. It has only been a week, but even multiple data aggregator sites have already bumped up Beast Mastery in the top 5, top 6-ish of results. This is Archon, then you have WoW Meta, which have put Beast Mastery right at the edge, right enough to enter the S tier of results right now. In the overall results of Warcraft logs itself, they are also here as well. So obviously a very big rise before the buffs. We even have our own example. A few days ago, we too killed Dimensius in Mythic, and we had, of course, our BM Hunter doing very well. Not just very well in the fight itself, but in particular in the last phase. I would consider this being very well in damage. Yeah, this seems like a healthy playstyle. And then, of course, you enter Execute, so you have again more procs of your Black Arrow, and the result was very, very good damage for the BM Hunter, which has shown up as rising in the results as Dark Ranger. Funny that for a long time many of the BM Hunters were simply saying, Blizzard, just stop trying to make Black Arrow and Dark Ranger Beast Mastery happen. It's just too weak. It's not gonna go over Pack Leader. Now we enter the situation where Dark Ranger has easily surpassed Pack Leader in the raid. And not just that, but even in Mythic Plus, Pack Leader still has the edge over Dark Ranger, but you do have multiple reasons and advantages in playing Dark Ranger in Mythic Plus as a BM Hunter. So it's definitely not that, 1% play rate niche kind of pick in Mythic Plus. Like if you were to pick, for example, let's say Arcane Mage between Sunfury and Spellslinger, for example. For the case of BM, it's a much more contested pick. It is definitely a world first problem kind of thing for hunters. If you look at the popularity, they now have both BM and marksmanship as being very popular, but of course every week that goes by we will see likely more BM hunters, so this number rising eventually to the top end marksmanship continue to go lower down. Now, a spec that didn't have the same end of Beast Mastery when it came to the buffs was Balanced Druid, because Balanced Druid was also a spec that was buffed alongside Beast Mastery. Now, the buff did do something, did have an effect. The change was that before the buffs to Druid, Eluna's Chosen was your to-go pick in Mythic Plus, just like last season. Meanwhile, when it came to the raid, Eluna's Chosen was still a much more playable option. They were technically doing more damage, they were technically the best choice, but it was the harder one to execute in the raid, very simply due to how much more immobile you became playing Eluna's Chosen because of your hard casting of Starfire, putting you at a much less mobile kind of spec compared to Keeper of the Grove. After the buffs, this made Keeper of the Grove good enough because Balanced Druid received buffs to their overall damage, but Eluna's Chosen was nerfed. So this ended up buffing Keeper of the Grove, which is now your better option also in terms of numbers in the raid. So the balance tuning did have an effect, the effect of making you now play Keeper of the Grove way more in the raid. However, in terms of performance, there wasn't actually an effect. You are still decided to be the big bro to your little bro Feral and just hang together at the bottom. Yeah, for the moment you have that fraud Unholy DK stealing your bottom two prize away, but eventually this will move out and you will go back to being the bottom 2 specs in this tier. If you remember last time, we were also talking about good specs raising their performance, and one of them was true and real, the other one was fake. The fake one was Arms. Now, 1 week later, Arms is back where it belongs. It is back to the bottom, in the bottom third of the results. To continue also on the instability of the performances of rogues, we did touch last week as to why we did have the 3 rogues plummeting all towards the bottom. How the results early on in the season were quite inflating the performance of rogues, especially because of add padding damage. So the more the season went by, the more the ads were dying very quickly, meaning you had less time to just pad on those ads, so the value and the performance of Outlaw and a Sub and Assassination was going down much more. We also mentioned though that with more logs of Dimensius, specs like Subtlety, for example, were going to be doing much better. Now at the moment, Subtlety shows up to be the second better performing spec on Dimensius. While Subtlety is not particularly good in phase 1 of Dimensius, phase 2 with some funneling allowed or some free cleave damage allowed also on the ads throughout all of P2 and their burst window in the damage increase in P3, Sub is also quite good in that fight, which would explain why in this week we did see Subtlety raise their performance quite a bit again. However, we are still talking about very middling overall results for these specs. We can still focus on our top 6, which used to be top 4 and then was expanded to top 5, and now it was expanded to top 6. So we started with Destrolock, Arcane Mage, Frost Decay and Elemental, then we added Marksmanship Hunter to the mix, then we added Fury Warrior to the mix, and then from now to next week we will likely have to see Beast Mastery also join these ranks, since they are already at the edge of this top 6 after their buffs. Now, to a much more boring situation would be the situation of the healers, which remains unchanged. I guess the only visible change that there is now a slightly larger gap at the top compared to the other specs. It's still reasonably balanced if you consider the median HPS of Holy Paladin, which is 4.7 million, and the median of Preservation, which is 5.2. It's a 500k HPS difference when the median is 5.2, so it's like a 9% healing difference between these specs. 9%, is still pretty balanced between top to bottom. Obviously the bottom technically would be Discipline, but let's just not count them for now. This also likely has to do with, again, more logs, not even particularly of Nexus King, and even then though you do see Evoker gapping the other specs more than 9%. We said that top to bottom overall was 9%. Here the top to bottom is closer to 15%. And then you also have Dimensius. Okay, let's not take this too seriously. It's perhaps not this much. It's not a 6.4 to 5, which is about 30% gap. But yes, the fight itself is an extremely good fight for Preservation Evoker. They can dump every single one of their CDs in P1. They will get stasis back in the first add phase, and then stasis back in the second add phase, and then all of the CDs will be back for the last phase. All of this time you spend between one phase to the next and these windows to get your cooldowns to come back are extremely good for Preservation Evoker. And because the fight does have quite a few heavy burst windows that you get to heal very quickly, Evoker is very powerful in the fight. So yes, Preservation would be quite a bit ahead of the other specs in this fight, perhaps not by 30%, but a good 15 to 20% definitely. So obviously it explains why in this week you do see Preservation in particular seemingly increasing their average by a bit more, because of how much better they are on Dimensions and how still quite good they are on Nexus King. While none of the other specs are having any particular movements from one week to the next, it was mainly really just Preservation Evoker. This is what we have for today when it comes to our recap of the raid performance of these specs. The reasonably expected rise in performance of Beastmastery Hunter given the buffs that they received and the buffs that Dark Ranger received, and the reasonably unexpected fall of Unholy DK thanks to a little boosted added Prankster, which temporarily is tanking the entire spec in their overall results. But for today, on the beginning of this new week, on this Monday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, almost on cue, we were midway through our video and we started having a concert of barking dogs in the background. We had to take some adjustments to our video recording.